She offered herself for one night of shelter. So why did the cowboy step back like she'd just crossed a line he refused to let her cross? The wind slammed against the door as it swung open, dust stinging her eyes, her fingers trembling where they gripped the torn edge of her satchel. He didn't move aside, didn't touch her. Just stood there, watching, while behind him, a boy peeked through the dark, holding his breath. Then he said something she hadn't expected, and everything inside her froze. What would you have done in her place? Follow for more stories like this. The wind came in hard that night, dragging dust across Dust Hollow like it meant to strip the town down to bone. Ruth Walker kept her head low as she stepped off the narrow boardwalk. The last lamp behind her flickered once, then steadied, casting a thin yellow light over the empty street. No voices, no doors opening, just the scrape of sand along wood and the loose shutter of the closed schoolhouse banging somewhere down the road. She still had the key in her pocket. Her fingers brushed it without thinking. Cold metal. Useless now. The landlord hadn't raised his voice when he told her to leave. That made it worse. He had stood in the doorway, coat already on, like he had places to be. "Can't keep a room for someone who can't pay," he said. "Storm's coming. Best you find somewhere quick." He didn't wait for her answer, just handed her the small cloth sack and closed the door. Now she walked past buildings that had once known her name. The grocer who used to nod when she bought flour on credit had turned his back. The woman at the bakery had gone still behind the counter, hands buried in dough, eyes sliding away. Ruth didn't knock. She knew how that would go. The wind picked up again, sharper this time. It slipped under her collar and down her spine. Her grip tightened on the worn satchel at her side. One corner had split open. Thread pulled loose from too many repairs. She pressed it shut with her palm, holding what little she had together by force. At the edge of town, the road narrowed into packed dirt. Beyond it, the land opened wide and dark, broken only by a faint lantern glow in the distance. A ranch. She stood there longer than she meant to. The wind pushed at her back like a hand that wouldn't take no for an answer. Then she started walking. Each step sank slightly into the soft ground. Dust coated her skirt, her boots, the hem dragging low. By the time she reached the gate, her throat was dry enough to ache. The wood creaked when she pushed it open. No dog barked. No voice called out. Just the steady glow from the house. She climbed the porch steps and knocked once. Nothing. She knocked again, harder. A pause. Then movement inside. A chair scraped. Footsteps, slow and measured. The door opened just enough for a man to fill the frame. Gideon Shaw didn't look surprised. He just looked at her. Tall, broad shoulders, shirt sleeves rolled, dust still clinging to the fabric. His face carried the kind of lines that didn't come from age alone. He didn't ask who she was. He waited. Ruth swallowed. Her voice didn't come the first time. She stopped, steadying herself. Tried again. "I need a place for the night." The wind gusted between them, pushing at the door, lifting a strand of her hair loose from its tie. He didn't move. "I don't have money," she said, more evenly now. "But I can work. I can cook, clean, mend." She felt the words slipping, scattering like the dust at her feet. So she stopped dressing them up. "I'll earn it any way you ask. Just let me stay tonight." The silence after that sat heavy. She didn't look away. Behind him, something shifted. A small shape near the wall. A boy, half hidden, watching through the narrow gap of the door. His eyes moved from her face to her hands, then back again. Ruth felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but didn't lower her gaze. Gideon's eyes flicked once to the boy, then back to her. He didn't ask what she meant, didn't question it, didn't soften either. He just stood there, measuring something she couldn't see. The wind howled across the yard, rattling the loose hinge on the gate behind her. Somewhere out in the dark, a piece of metal struck wood with a hollow clang. She tightened her hold on the satchel. The seam gave a little more under her fingers. For a moment, she thought he might close the door. He didn't. Instead, he stepped back. Just enough. The space opened between them, quiet and plain. "Come in," he said. No promise in it, no warmth either, but no price. Ruth hesitated only a second. Then she crossed the threshold. The boy shifted again, still watching. Gideon closed the door against the wind, the latch falling into place with a soft, final click. Outside, Dust Hollow disappeared into the dark. Inside, Ruth Walker stood with her back to the door. The storm cut off behind her, and no clear sense yet of what she had just stepped into. The room held warmth, but not comfort. A small fire burned low in the stone hearth. A pot sat near the edge, steam rising slow and steady. The smell of coffee lingered, sharp and plain. Gideon moved past her without a word, setting another log onto the fire. Sparks lifted, then settled. He didn't look at her again right away. "Table's there," he said, nodding toward a rough wooden surface near the window. "Water buckets by the sink." Ruth gave a small nod, though he wasn't watching. She set her satchel down carefully, as if the floor might reject it. The torn seam showed more clearly in the light. She turned it inward, hiding it. The boy still stood near the wall. Up close, he looked older than she first thought. 8, maybe. Thin but steady. His shirt hung loose at the collar, sleeves rolled uneven. He didn't smile. "You staying?" he asked. Ruth hesitated. "Just for the night." He studied her like that answer didn't settle anything. Gideon poured water into a tin cup and set it on the table. "Drink," he said. She crossed the room slowly, each step measured. Her boots left faint tracks of dust on the floorboards. She noticed it, paused, then kept going. The water was cool. She held the cup in both hands before taking a sip. "You work," Gideon said, still facing the fire. "You eat. You stay. That's all." Ruth lowered the cup slightly. "That's all?" He glanced back then. Brief, direct. "That's all." No bargain. No weight behind the words. Just a line drawn plain and steady. Ruth nodded once. "I can start now." He shook his head. "You'll sleep first. Storm'll run all night." That ended it. He pointed toward a narrow door off the side of the room. "Cot in there. Blankets folded." Ruth picked up her satchel again and moved toward it. The boy stepped aside just enough to let her pass. Inside, the room was small. Bare wood walls, a single cot, a folded quilt, clean but worn thin at the edges, a basin on a crate with a chipped pitcher beside it. She set her satchel down and sat on the edge of the cot. The mattress dipped under her weight. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she reached down and slipped her boots off. One, then the other. Sand fell from the soles in small, quiet piles. She lay back without undressing. One hand stayed on the satchel. The wind pressed against the walls, long and low. The house creaked, steady but not weak. Somewhere outside, a loose chain tapped against wood in a slow rhythm. Ruth didn't close her eyes right away. She listened. No footsteps near the door. No voices whispering. No latch turning. Just the fire in the other room. And the wind. Sometime before morning, sleep found her. She woke before the light. The sky beyond the small window had just begun to pale. The wind had died down to a low breath across the land. Ruth sat up slowly. For a second, she didn't remember where she was. Then the smell of coffee reached her again. She pulled her boots back on and stepped into the main room. Gideon was already up, sleeves rolled, hands steady as he worked a strip of leather at the table, stitching it with a small awl. A mug sat near his elbow, steam curling faint. The boy sat on the floor with a piece of charcoal, dragging it across a flat board. Lines and shapes. No letters. Ruth paused in the doorway. Gideon didn't look up. There's flour in the tin, bacon in the pan. If you know how to cook, you can start. No greeting, no question. She moved to the stove without answering, lifted the lid on the flour tin. The hinge squeaked. She poured just enough into a bowl, added water from the bucket, mixed it with her fingers. The motions came back easy. Soon the smell of bread joined the coffee. The boy watched her now. "You make that every day?" he asked. "When there's flour," she said. He nodded like that made sense. When the bread was done, she set 3 pieces on the table. Then she stepped back. "I can eat after," she said. Gideon finally looked at her. "Not long." "Just enough. You eat with us," he said. She didn't move right away. The boy slid onto the bench and picked up his piece. "It smells better than yesterday," he said, already chewing. Ruth took the last seat, careful, like the wood might give way under her. They ate in quiet. After, Gideon stood and reached for his coat. "Fence line needs checking. Storm might have pulled it loose." He paused by the door, looked once at the table, at the plates, at the woman who had not touched much of her food. Then he stepped out. The door closed behind him. Ruth gathered the plates slowly, washed them in the basin, set them to dry. The boy stayed where he was, watching her again. After a while, he pushed the board toward her. The charcoal left a dark smear across the wood. "Can you write?" he asked. Ruth wiped her hands on her skirt, took the charcoal. She turned the board and drew a straight line, then another. "N," she said, quiet, "for Noah." He leaned closer. She wrote it again, slower. He traced it with his finger. "Will you still be here tomorrow?" he asked. Ruth didn't answer right away. She looked toward the door Gideon had gone through, then back at the boy. Her hand rested on the board, just above the letter. "I don't know," she said, but she didn't stand up to leave. The days settled into a quiet rhythm after that. Morning came early over Dust Hollow. The light slipped through the cracks in the wood, pale and thin at first, then stronger as the sun climbed. Ruth would already be up by then. Coffee warming on the stove, a small pan of beans or bread set aside before Gideon stepped in from the yard, boots dusted, sleeves damp from the well. She moved through the house like someone careful not to disturb what wasn't hers. No wasted steps, no noise. Gideon noticed. He didn't say so. Noah did. He followed her more now. Not close enough to be in the way, but near enough to see, to learn. The board they used for letters leaned by the wall. Each morning, a new line appeared. Each afternoon, Noah traced it until his fingers turned gray with charcoal. Ruth never asked him to stay. He never asked her again if she would leave. One evening, Gideon came in later than usual. The sun had already dropped behind the ridge, leaving the sky the color of worn copper. The gate creaked louder than before. Ruth looked up from the table. He paused just inside the door, noticed the lamp already lit. The plates set out. 3 this time, not 2. A small thing. He took his hat off and hung it on the peg by the door. "You didn't have to wait," he said. Ruth shook her head. "Food's better hot." He gave a quiet nod and sat. Noah slid onto the bench, already reaching for the bread. I wrote my name twice today, he said. Gideon glanced at the board, then at Ruth. Did you? No praise. Just acknowledgement, but the corner of his mouth shifted, just a little. The next morning, the sound came before the man did. Hoofbeats, slow, certain, not passing by, stopping. Ruth was at the basin when she heard it. The water stilled in the bowl as her hands paused mid-motion. Gideon was already turning toward the door. Noah looked up. The knock didn't come. The door opened instead. Silas Boone stepped in like he owned the place. His coat was clean despite the dust, boots polished. A silver watch chain caught the light as he moved. His eyes swept the room once, taking in the table, the stove, the woman by the basin. Then they settled on Ruth. Well now, he said, voice low and easy. Didn't expect to find you this far out. Ruth didn't answer. Her hands stayed in the water, fingers still. Gideon didn't move forward. Didn't step back either. He stood where he was, between the door and the rest of the room. You lost? Gideon asked. Silas smiled faintly. Not at all. I go where I please. His gaze shifted again, slow and deliberate. You know who you've got here? He said, looking back at Gideon. Or did she forget to tell you? The air changed, just slightly. Ruth dried her hands on her skirt. The cloth trembled once before she stilled it. She's working here, Gideon said. Silas let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. Working, he repeated. That one way to put it? Noah shifted closer to Ruth's side. Silas noticed. His eyes flicked down, then back up. You ought to ask her, he went on, voice softer now. Ask her what she offers when she's got nothing else left. The words hung there, not loud, not shouted, but heavy. Ruth kept her eyes on the table, on the grain of the wood, on anything that wasn't him. Gideon didn't turn to look at her. He just said, You've said what you came to say. Silas tilted his head slightly. Studied him, have I? He asked. A pause. Then he stepped back toward the door. Town talks, he added. Might be worth listening. He pulled his gloves on slow, one finger at a time. Wouldn't want you getting more than you bargained for. The door closed behind him with a soft, final sound. The room stayed still. Noah's hand tightened on Ruth's sleeve. She didn't pull away. Gideon walked to the table and set his hat down. Then he stood there, one hand resting on the back of the chair. He didn't ask, not right away. Ruth moved first. She picked up the cloth from the counter, folded it once, then again, set it down. Her satchel sat by the wall where she had left it days ago. She crossed the room and picked it up. Noah looked up at her. You going somewhere? She didn't answer him. Gideon's voice came low. You don't have to. I do, she said. Not loud, not sharp, just certain. She reached for a scrap of paper near the shelf, found a bit of charcoal, wrote slow, each letter pressed deep into the page. Then she set it on the table. Gideon didn't move to take it. Ruth pulled her shawl around her shoulders. The wind outside had picked up again, brushing against the walls in long strokes. At the door, she paused. For a moment, it seemed like she might turn back. She didn't. She stepped out into the dust. The gate creaked as it opened, then closed. Inside, the paper sat where she had left it, the charcoal still fresh. You gave me a roof, I won't take your name with me. Noah climbed down from the bench and walked to the table. He looked at the paper, then up at Gideon. She's not coming back, he said. Gideon didn't answer. He just stood there looking at the door. like he was listening for something that wasn't there anymore. The wind had shifted again. It came in low across the yard, dragging loose dirt along the fence line. The gate creaked once, then settled. No footsteps, no shadow returning. Gideon reached for the paper on the table. He didn't read it right away, just held it between his fingers, the charcoal still faint against the grain. Then he set it down again. Noah hadn't moved. She said she'd stay, the boy muttered, not looking up. She said she didn't know. Gideon picked up his hat. That was before, he said. He stepped out into the yard. The tracks were easy to follow at first. The ground still held the imprint of her boots from the night before. Light. Careful steps. She hadn't run, just walked. Toward the open land. Gideon moved fast but steady, keeping his eyes low. Past the gate. Along the dry ridge where the soil hardened into cracked lines. The wind tried to scatter the trail, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. The sky had turned a dull gray, clouds gathering over the distant hills. The air felt tight, like something waiting. By the time he reached the edge of Dry Creek, the tracks had started to blur. He slowed. Then he saw them. Not hers. Hoof marks. Fresh. Deep. More than one. His jaw tightened. He followed them down the shallow slope, boots sliding slightly on loose stone. The creek bed was dry this time of year, just a narrow stretch of pale dirt cutting through the land. Voices carried across it. Low. Close. Gideon didn't call out. He stepped forward. Ruth stood near the bank, her back straight, but her hands tight at her sides. Silas Boone sat on his horse, reins loose in one hand. Two men behind him, silent, watching. You made it far, Silas was saying. Farther than I expected. Ruth didn't answer. Her satchel hung at her side, the torn seam wider now. I told you before, he went on, voice smooth. A woman alone out here doesn't get to choose her way. Not for long. Ruth's gaze stayed on the ground ahead of her. I'm not asking, she said quietly. Silas leaned forward slightly in the saddle. No, you never did. One of the men shifted. The leather of his saddle creaked. The air pressed down, heavy. Then a voice cut through it. That's enough. Gideon stepped into view, coming down the slope without hurry. He didn't reach for anything, didn't raise his voice. He just walked until he stood between Ruth and the horses. Silas's eyes flicked to him. A small smile touched his mouth. Thought you might come, he said. Gideon didn't answer. He stood there, shoulders square, the space between him and Ruth closing without him looking back. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the horses shifted, stamping once against the dry ground. Silas studied Gideon, measured him. You know what you're stepping into? He asked. Gideon's voice came even. I know she's not going with you. A beat. Silas exhaled through his nose. Not quite a laugh. You don't own that choice, he said. No, Gideon replied. She does. The words settled. Ruth lifted her eyes then. Just slightly. For the first time since they'd found her, she wasn't looking at the ground. She wasn't moving either. Silas's gaze lingered on her a second longer. Then he leaned back in the saddle. Plenty of trouble comes to men who take on more than they understand, he said. Gideon didn't shift. Then I'll deal with it when it gets here. Silas watched him a moment longer. Then he gave a small tilt of his head. Your call, he said. He turned his horse with a quiet pull of the reins. The other men followed. Hoofbeats faded slow across the open land. The silence that followed was different. lighter, but not easy. Ruth didn't move right away. Neither did Gideon. The wind crossed to the dry creek, softer now. "You shouldn't have come," she said at last. Gideon let out a breath. "You shouldn't have left." She almost smiled at that. Almost. Then it faded. "I wasn't staying," she said. "Not like that." He nodded once. "I know." Another pause. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her satchel. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door." Gideon looked out toward the ridge where the riders had disappeared, then back at her. Trouble doesn't wait for an invitation. She met his eyes fully then. For a second, something shifted between them. Not new, just clearer. He stepped back slightly. Not turning, just making space. "We should head back," he said. Ruth hesitated. Then she moved. She stepped past him, not wide, not distant, close enough that her sleeve brushed his arm. She didn't pull away. The walk back was quiet. The house came into view slowly, rising from the land like it had always been there. Noah stood near the fence, one hand gripping the rail. He didn't run. He just waited. When Ruth reached the gate, she paused. Her hand rested on the wood. Then she pushed it open. Gideon followed a step behind. Inside, the house felt the same, but not quite. Ruth set her satchel down where it had been before. The torn seam faced outward now. She didn't turn it away. Gideon moved to the shelf and poured water into a cup, set it on the table. She picked it up. Their fingers brushed. This time, neither of them pulled back right away. Noah watched them both. Didn't say anything. The wind outside had quieted. Inside, something else had, too. Not fixed, but settled. For now. The days that followed didn't speak of what had happened at Dry Creek. They didn't need to. Ruth rose before the sun, same as before. The coffee came first, then the bread. The small routines held steady, like they had roots in the ground. Gideon worked the fence line longer than usual, stayed out past the heat, came back with dust along his collar and silence in his hands. Noah watched both of them. He didn't ask questions, but he stayed closer to Ruth now, sat beside her at the table, brought the board without being told, wrote slower, more careful, like the letters mattered more than before. One evening, the wind picked up again. Not a storm this time, just a long breath across the land. It rattled the loose hinge on the back shed and set the lantern by the door, swaying faint. Ruth stood near the shelf, folding a cloth she had already folded once. Her satchel sat by the wall. She looked at it longer than she meant to. Gideon noticed. He set his cup down. The sound was soft, but it carried. "You heading out again?" he asked. Ruth didn't turn. "I was thinking about it." The words came quiet. Careful. Noah stopped moving. Gideon leaned back slightly in his chair. Not tense. Not relaxed either. "You don't have to leave on account of him," he said. Ruth shook her head. "It's not just him." She turned then. "This place. It runs on things I didn't earn." Gideon's brow shifted. Just slightly. "You work," he said. "You earn." "That's not what I mean." She stepped closer to the table, her hands resting on the wood. "You gave me something when I had nothing, and I came in willing to trade for it." Her voice held steady, but her fingers tightened. "I don't want that to be the reason I stay." The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that waits. Gideon reached into his coat pocket. He didn't rush, just took something small from inside and set it on the table between them. A ring. Plain, worn thin along one edge. The metal dulled with time. Ruth looked at it, but didn't touch it. Gideon's voice came low. You didn't stay because of that. He tapped the table once. Light. You stayed because you wanted to. Ruth's eyes flicked up to his. He held her gaze. You came here offering yourself just to get through a night, he said. That's not what this is now. He didn't move the ring closer, didn't push it toward her. I'm not asking you to stay the way you first came in, he went on. I'm asking you to stay because you're already part of this place. Noah looked between them, then down at the ring. Ruth's hand hovered near the table, then pulled back. She turned slightly, looking past them both. The room, the stove, the small window with the light fading beyond it, the third chair at the table. It had been empty when she arrived. Not anymore. Noah shifted on the bench. His voice came small but clear. If you go, who teaches me to read? Ruth closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. She reached out. Her fingers brushed the ring first. Light, like she wasn't sure it would stay solid under her touch. Then she picked it up, held it in her palm. Gideon didn't speak, didn't move. She didn't say yes, didn't say anything at all. She slid the ring onto her finger. It fit loose. Not made for her, but it stayed. Ruth pulled the chair back slowly and sat down at the table, right where she had been the night before. Gideon watched her, then gave a small nod. That was enough. Noah let out a breath he hadn't meant to hold. The wind outside eased. A year later, the house looked different. Not larger, but fuller. A second shelf lined the wall near the window. Books stacked uneven, some worn, some new. A slate leaned beside them, chalk marks half erased. Children's voices carried faint across the yard some mornings. They came from the nearby ranches, walked the dirt road in pairs, sat at the long table while Ruth stood at the front, her hand steady as she drew letters one by one. Noah read aloud now, slow at first, then stronger. Gideon built a small room off the side of the house before the winter came. The wood still smelled fresh when the snow passed through. The fence line held. The gate no longer creaked. Above it, a small wooden board hung, carved by Gideon's hand. The letters weren't perfect, but they stood firm. Nothing here was bought. Everything was chosen. Ruth stood beneath it one evening, her hand resting lightly against the wood. Gideon came up beside her. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. The land stretched wide in front of them. Quiet. Steady. And for the first time in a long while there was nothing in it she needed to run from. If you stood where Ruth stood that evening, you might feel it too. That strange stillness after a life spent bracing for the next door to close. The moment when no one is asking you to prove your worth. No one is waiting for you to fail. Just a place. A table with your seat already there. A hand that doesn't pull away. And maybe you'd wonder, what would you have done? Would you have kept walking that first night? Or would you have knocked, knowing you might not be welcomed? Some people spend their whole lives trying to earn a place in the world. But sometimes, the hardest thing isn't surviving. It's accepting that you no longer have to trade pieces of yourself just to stay. Ruth didn't find safety because the world changed. She found it because someone chose to see her, and she chose to stay. And maybe that's what home really is. Not where you end up, but where you are finally allowed to remain. If this story stayed with you, tell me where you're listening from. I'd like to know how far it traveled. And if you feel like walking a little further down these quiet roads with me, there are more stories waiting. Stories about people who lost their way and somehow found something better than what they were searching for.